Hello, we'll begin our webinar in 30 seconds after we've given the attendees a chance to populate. All right, thank you for joining us. In this webinar, we will cover an important Buy America update related to construction materials. Specifically, we intend to cover three topics related to the Build America, Buy America Act's requirement that construction materials used in federally funded infrastructure projects are produced in the United States. First, we will discuss the importance of the construction materials requirement to U.S. manufacturing and the general requirement that all FTA-funded projects use construction materials produced in the United States. Next, we will cover the Department of Transportation's implementation of the construction materials requirement for funds obligated beginning on November 10, 2022. Finally, we will discuss DOT's January 30th, 2023 limited waiver of the construction materials requirement for certain contracts and solicitations. Our intent is not that you come away from this presentation with a perfect knowledge of how the construction materials requirement or DOT's two limited waivers apply in every possible situation, but rather that this webinar give you an understanding of when the construction materials requirement applies, when an award, contract, or expenditure may be exempt from the new requirement, and where to go for additional assistance applying the construction materials requirement in waivers. Regarding question and answer, we will not be taking questions during the presentation today. Instead, if you have a question, please enter it in the chat in Zoom. Please identify yourself and provide an email address so we can follow up with you after the presentation. As a reminder, the contents of this presentation do not have the force and effect of law and are not meant to bind the public in any way. This presentation is intended only to provide clarity to the public regarding existing requirements under the law and agency policies. DOT and FTA's goal is to implement the construction materials requirement to ensure that we are maximizing the amount of taxpayer funds used on U.S. produced materials consistent with the law. We want to do so without causing undue disruption to existing projects sufficiently advanced in the procurement process. The Build America, Buy America Act, or BABA, states that U.S. taxpayer dollars should be spent on public works infrastructure constructed using materials produced in the United States by American workers. BABA's stated goal is to maximize the use of American-made materials in federally funded projects to help American businesses compete in strategic industries and help America's workers thrive. At the same time, FTA, DOT, and the Office of Management and Budget recognize that fundamental and job-creating shifts in manufacturing supply chains take time, and that there are ongoing transportation infrastructure projects that are crucial to the American public. When it became law, BABA initially was set to begin applying to FTA grants 180 days after enactment, or May 14, 2022. However, DOT heard from many stakeholders that this was not enough time to transition to using U.S. produced construction materials on projects. So, in May 2022, DOT issued a general temporary waiver that delayed the date BABA would begin applying to DOT grants for another 180 days, or to November 10, 2022. Since November 10, every grant FTA has awarded has required the use of construction materials produced in the United States. However, as I will discuss in a moment, DOT's new waiver creates some limited exceptions for projects that are already considerably underway. As you now know, the Build America, Buy America Act, enacted as part of the bipartisan infrastructure law, added a new requirement for FTA recipients that construction materials are produced in the United States in addition to the existing requirements for steel, iron, and manufactured products, including rolling stock. As we discussed on the previous slide, the effective date for the new requirement is tied to the obligation of funds. For FTA, the date of obligation is the same as the date of award execution, and the date was set to November 10, 2022. BABA set forth 5 categories of construction materials: non-ferrous or non-iron metals, plastic and polymer-based products, including polyvinyl chloride, composite building materials, and polymers used in fiber optic cables, glass, including optic glass, lumber, and drywall. Notably, cement or cementitious materials, aggregates such as stone, sand, or gravel, or aggregate binding agents or additives are not construction materials. On April 18, 2022, the Office of Management and Budget published initial implementation guidance, determining that a construction material is produced in the United States if the final manufacturing process and the immediately preceding manufacturing stage occur in the United States. Stay tuned, including by signing up for GovDelivery and by checking FTA's Buy America webpage for updated guidance defining both construction materials and what constitutes U.S. manufacture. BABA's application, based on the date a grant is obligated, complicates FTA grants using pre-award authority or having long lead times. In these cases, contracts may have been executed or solicitations issued prior to November 10, 2022, although they will be funded by grants awarded after November 10. This is a common situation for FTA grantees, but it affects other agencies as well. Recognizing this situation and to complete projects in a timely manner while implementing the new requirement, DOT issued 2 narrowly targeted waivers to transition pre-existing projects to full implementation of the construction materials requirement. As a rule, BABA applies to construction materials covered by grants obligated on or after November 10, 2022. Before discussing DOT's 2 transitional waivers in more detail, let's discuss 2 limited safe harbors where the construction materials requirement does not apply. Projects meeting the conditions of these 2 safe harbors will not lose eligibility if they include non-US manufactured construction materials, so long as FTA's pre-existing Buy America requirements are met. The first safe harbor applies to projects with all construction-related grants obligated prior to November 10, 2022. The second safe harbor applies to construction materials procured if the grant is obligated on or after January 30th, 2023, and the contract was executed before May 14, 2022. In these 2 scenarios, grantees can be confident that their projects or procurements are not subject to the construction materials requirements. In other, more complicated scenarios, we encourage you to consult your regional office. This slide is intended to depict how both limited waivers apply to construction materials. Under both waivers, we first look at the date of obligation or grant award. Based on that date, an award is treated by a specific set of rules. A different rule applies to 3 categories of awards. For example, for a Category 1 award obligated before November 10, 2022, the construction materials requirement does not apply, period. Category 2 and 3 have additional qualifications covered under the new contracts and solicitations waiver. Okay, I'll pause here. If you've made it this far, you understand everything we need you to know about the 2 narrow waivers for construction materials. Our primary purpose today is that you understand when the construction materials requirement applies, when a waiver may apply, and when to ask your FTA regional office for assistance in determining waiver applicability. If you would like to stick around, we will cover DOT's new contracts and solicitations waiver in more detail. As previously stated, the contracts and solicitations waiver is confusing. Where there are questions, contact your regional office. FTA is committed to working with you to find the right answer. Category 1 is based on DOT's May 2022 temporary construction materials waiver for construction activities funded only through grants obligated before November 10, 2022. The construction materials requirement does not apply, period. From this slide on, we discuss application of the new contracts and solicitations waiver, which again is complex. Our primary purpose is to help you recognize which category applies to your award, and particularly for Category 3 or GAP grants, when to seek assistance from your regional office. The new contracts and solicitations waiver looks at the following factors: time of grant obligation, timing of contract award, sometimes the time of contract solicitations, and sometimes it even depends on the time when the contractor takes delivery of construction materials. This waiver is narrowly targeted to allow some previously executed contracts and some previously published solicitations move forward without changes or resoliciting work. The waiver requires a close review of construction materials procurements to determine what materials are waiver eligible and in what circumstances. We expect that there will be questions and some confusion about the waiver. In all cases, the best and easiest answer will be to order materials made in the USA. FTA grants obligated on or after January 30th, 2023 are potentially covered by the contracts and solicitations waiver as what we are calling Category 2 grants. This waiver is not retroactive. It is available only for FTA grants obligated beginning on January 30th. These are grants awarded on or after the date the waiver was issued. For Category 2 grants, the contract and solicitations waiver applies to any contract entered into before May 14, 2022, period. Contracts executed after May 14th may still qualify for the waiver, but with additional limitations. Any contract entered into on or after May 14 and before November 10, 2022 is waived, but only for construction materials a contractor takes delivery of before October 1, 2024. Finally, any contract entered into on or after November 10, 2022 and before March 10, 2023 is waived, but only if the contract results from a solicitation published prior to May 14, 2022, and only for construction materials a contractor takes delivery of before October 1, 2024. The idea of using May 14 as a cutoff date is that this is the date BABA initially was supposed to begin applying. So the public was on notice that their contract solicitations should have begun to include construction materials at least by this date. The purpose of extending the window to complete contracts to March is to complete contract awards to March is to give project sponsors a chance to wrap up big procurements they and their contractors have been working on for a long time. But again, only if those solicitations were published before May 14, 2022. October 2024 should give anyone caught in one of these in-between situations plenty of time either to receive the materials ordered under the contract or take whatever contract actions are necessary to ensure materials delivered after that date comply with Buy America. As previously stated, we absolutely encourage you to contact your regional office as you have questions about waiver applicability for Category 2 grants. Careful listeners will have noticed that there is a gap between the end of Category 1, November 10, and the beginning of Category 2, January 30. We will call grants falling between these two dates Category 3 or GAP grants. Category 3 grants are those obligated after the expiration of the initial construction materials waiver and before issuance of the new contracts and solicitations waiver. In most situations, Category 3 grants must apply the construction materials requirement. However, there is a narrow exception described in the waiver for certain contracts executed on or after January 30th, 2023. We do not expect to see a large number of Category 3 grants, and we are not discussing the complications of Category 3 in the presentation today. We highly encourage any grantee using such a grant either to purchase US manufactured construction materials or to contact its FTA regional office for technical assistance. All right, so let's take a step back and review how both waivers apply to the construction materials requirement. The next two slides, this flowchart and an action matrix, contain visuals intended to depict FTA's main objective for today's session, that participants know when construction material requirements apply, when a waiver may exempt construction materials from the new requirement, and when to consult your regional office regarding waiver application. The construction materials action matrix looks confusing, but it illustrates an important concept. As you can see from the table, we are primarily looking at two important dates. First, the date of grant or grants obligated for construction activity, and second, the date of contract execution for construction materials. We've now discussed both Category 1 grants, those grants obligated before November 10, 2022, and Category 2 grants, those grants obligated on or after January 30th, 2023. To recap, Category 1 grants are exempt from construction materials requirements, period. Category 2 grants may either be totally exempt if a contract is executed before May 14, 2022. Follow one of two special rules that we discussed that apply if a contract is executed before November 10, 2022, or if a contract is executed before March 10, 2023, but based on a solicitation issued before May 14, 2022. Finally, they may be subject to the construction materials requirement in every other case. As depicted on the slide, we ask that you consult your regional office whenever a Category 3 grant arises. That is, when the grant award is obligated beginning on November 10, 2022, and before January 30th, 2023. There are some additional situations where we ask that you contact your regional office. Those are construction costs funded by a combination of Category 2 or 3 grants, change orders, contract amendments, and grant amendments. FTA funds a wide variety of construction activities, and each funding situation may present facts or circumstances not contemplated under the contracts and solicitations waiver. You may encounter situations and nuances we cannot anticipate today. For this reason, it is important to raise unclear issues to your regional office. The materials discussed today are linked here for your access. In order, U.S. Department of Transportation's initial waiver of the construction materials requirement. OMB's initial implementation guidance for construction materials. The January 30th contracts and solicitations waiver. And finally, FTA's webpage. These slides will be posted to FTA's Buy America webpage following this presentation. Below are key dates beginning with BABA's enactment. You can read this slide for yourself, but two important takeaways are DOT's initial construction materials waiver delayed the effective date of the construction materials requirement from May 14, 2022 to awards obligated on or after November 10, 2022. And DOT's contracts and solicitations waiver exempts certain additional contracts from the construction materials requirement where contracts and solicitations are sufficiently advanced and waiver requirements are met. We do expect challenges and questions arising from today's presentation. Please keep your regional office in the loop as you encounter these challenges. To summarize my best guidance from today, when in doubt, buy American-made construction materials, and when in doubt, contact FTA. Thank you.